I'll tell you, you hit it right on the head. Here's the problem. This is why Black Lives Matter. It's basically, in my opinion, the Al Sharpton of the 21st century. They're profiteers. They are profiting on trying to give a narrative, a false narrative, that is white racist cops that's destroying the black community. You point out Chicago. No Black Lives presence walking through the neighborhood protesting to stop black-on-black crime. Al Sharpton goes to the George Floyd funeral, used a funeral to launch a campaign speech attacking Donald Trump. I don't see Al Sharpton in Chicago. That 3-year-old kid who was killed. You know why? Because it's not profitable. There's no money to be made. And this narrative, which is, and again, I have the credibility. Attack me. As a civil rights attorney, I know there may be 1 or 2% of bad cops. But the 98%, they're great. And when you talk about Chicago, you talk about Atlanta, you talk about Washington, D.C. and L.A., this big lie, Mark, of systemic discrimination. How can you have systemic discrimination in Chicago when the leadership is minority? I know what systemic discrimination is. It does not exist. But yet, this is the narrative that the Black Lives leadership portrays, the Democratic leadership, systemic discrimination. It doesn't exist. They don't know what they're talking about. This is not 1960. We don't have Bull Connor and the German Shepherds. This is 2020. African American, on your show. It's not like it was 50 years ago. But Black Lives Matter and the Democratic leadership wants you to think it's 1960. Well, I'm sick of that narrative.
And Leo, the Democrat Party doesn't have any answers. The Democrat Party runs these cities with an iron fist. It's one-party rule. All the money from the feds and the states and the local tax base flow through their hands. They choose the people for these highest positions, even police chiefs. The prosecutors are locally elected. They do not support school choice. They're in bed with these public sector unions. They don't introduce free market principles where people can be encouraged to make profits, to invest. All these things that the rest of the country does is not happening in our inner cities. And it's not because people are minorities. It's because you've got iron-fisted one-party rule that will not introduce true reform. It doesn't have a liberty agenda. It has a Democrat Party agenda. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. And the most important question that I learned in law school is why? Why do they do that? And I've been trying to figure it out, and I know why. It's pandering. It is their power base, Mark. They want their constituents, their constituents to believe that the Democratic Party and the government has to do everything. It's the only way they can stay in power. They don't want charter school. They don't want choice. They don't want people of color to think for themselves, to work and make their own career choice. They want the government to hand out things. They want their constituents to believe that the government is everything for them. Well, I won't drink that Kool-Aid anymore because choice, opportunity to make personal decisions has to take place for people of color, for anyone in this country to move up. I made personal decisions to go to law school, to become a school teacher, to work. And I will no longer buy the rhetoric by Democrats to make the assumption that only government, Mark, only government can help you out. No one else. I refute and reject that premise.
And you know, the irony, Leo, is if you want to burn the system down, they are the system. They are the system in the inner cities, in these blue areas. And they want to make the system bigger and more powerful and more centralized, where people's independence, their liberty, their ability of free will is crushed. So on the one hand, they talk about the system. Well, they own the system. And then on the other hand, they talk about burning it down. When we come back, I want to ask you, Leo Terrell, what kind of reaction are you getting among friends and colleagues that you've worked with in the past, since you're such an outspoken defender of justice and equality and order? We'll be right back.